Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Asian Civilisations Museum. I'm Kevin Lam, Senior Curator of Chinese Art at ACM, and I welcome you today for our ACM Conversations. ACM Conversations is a series of talks featuring leading researchers and cultural practitioners and other leading individuals from different industries, either from Singapore or from abroad. We brought them to ACM and have them in conversation with ACM curators and educators. And thanks to the Dalio Philanthropies to make this happen. And today, we are delighted to have Professor Thomas Koemans all along from Belgium to be with us today. Professor Koemans from Belgium, from the University of Leuven. He is Professor of Architectural History and Built Heritage Conservation. And over his 30 years of research, he has looked into a lot of different issues, especially the exchange between China, the East, and Europe. And we are very happy to have Professor Koemans here today to be with us. Professor Koemans, in addition to his wonderful research, he is also a prolific scholar. You can find publications by Professor Koemans in French, in English, and also in Chinese. So I want to share a little bit with you one of his latest publication that I think a lot, he will be talking some of the materials from it today as well. This wonderful book, when I was flipping through it, I was so astonished by all the beautiful pictures that's included in this. Especially after we have received our catalog, which is also out now. We have got also a lot of beautiful pictures, but when I was comparing the two, I was a little bit jealous. I think Professor Koemans seems to have the better designer than us. And so today, Professor Koemans' talk will be beyond the pagodas, other Tushanwan models and the purposes. And this is based on his archival research, extensive archival research on different archives in Europe and also in China. And what Professor Koemans is going to do today is, in fact, to tell us more about the use, the functions of the models that were made in the Tushanwan workshop under Professor Beck. And as someone who have been leading quite a number of tours for our exhibition, that's one of the questions I have always been asked. Why these people, why this workshop would make these pagodas? And what are the criteria why they choose these pagodas in particular? And based on what they did this selection and made these pagodas. And so today, what Professor Koemans is going to do is to, with his archival research, share with us some of the other stories of these pagodas, of these models. And without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Koemans on stage. And thank you, Professor Koemans.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for your introduction, Mr. Lam. Thank you, Professor Ho Pui Peng, old friend that I'm so glad to meet here again. Thank you for all of you to come on a Saturday morning to spend 1 hour around Sheshan and Tushanwan. And everything is starting from this photo. In my research on the churches on the sacred hill of Sheshan near Shanghai, I found this photo of a model. This is not a model of a pagoda. This is a model of a church. And it's also done by the same brother Beck. It's the same author. But the purpose is completely different. Because this is a model that has been made to convince people to invest money for building this church. So this is a design model, and the aim is to build a church. For the pagodas, it's a totally different story, as we will see. And this comparison is important. But before starting this, I want just to, in a brief introduction, locate things and the places where I will talk about. So this is the hill of Sheshan. near to Shanghai in the Songjiang plain. So we have to imagine that delta area of the Yangtze River, which is absolutely flat with canals, completely flat, and there are 10 hills in that landscape. Maybe old islands from the prehistory, and with rocks. And the highest one is Sheshan, and it's about 100 meters high. It's not very high, but in that landscape it looks high. And this hill, for centuries, had been a sacred hill. So there were temples, Buddhist temples built on that hill. About 10 has been recorded. And when the French missionaries came back to China in the 1840s, these temples were still there, but they were soon destroyed by the Taipings in the 1850s and the early 1860s. And the Jesuits were able to buy the hill gradually, and the hill had only ruins. And they started to build churches and to colonize that hill and to Christianize that hill. So that is really the core of the story, and that is the background of also the Tushanwan pagodas, because the authors of the pagodas and the whole project of the Jesuits in Shanghai is a missionary project, and is a project to convert people to Christianity and to bring a new religion to replace old religion. So that is definitely their motivation. That is the reason why they went to China and they developed their apostolate. So we never must forget that, because that gives another perspective or other understanding to what they are doing, and what they are doing was very coherent. Bringing faith, and on the top of the hill you have a church, one of the churches. This is their residence, facing south, so they respect feng shui, but they criticize feng shui, but they perfectly respect it. That's the village on the bottom, and this is the observatory. So the Jesuits is always faith and science. And the observatory, built in 1900, so at the same moment you have the Boxer Bracing in Beijing, in Shanghai, they built an observatory on top of the hill. And that is the first modern observatory in East Asia. Fully coming from France, all the pieces carried from France, the dome, a metallic dome, the first time built in China. Nobody could build that, so they brought engineers, Jesuit engineers from India, to assemble this building with a very complex lens inside. Still existing today, it's a national heritage. So that hill is an important place and is in dialogue with Shanghai. So it was a day excursion, a day pilgrimage from Shanghai through the canals. It was possible to do it in one day. And it was a place where many people from Shanghai were coming, and also from the whole area, the Songjiang plain. The Jesuits first built a chapel on top of the hill. That's the idea, to take possession. 1868. And in 1870, there was a siege of Shanghai by rebels, and the Jesuits made a vow. They went to this chapel, and they made a vow to Mary, and they say, if you save us, we will build a church for you. That's very typical in the relation between human being and God. If you help me, I will reward you, and that kind of, I give you in order you give to me. So that is that relationship between human beings and gods, and this is worldwide. 1870 is the year of the Tianjin massacre, where missionaries were really raped and killed, so it was a very, very dramatic moment. It's also the moment of the collapse of the Second Empire in France, with the vow of Montmartre, the church in Paris, also built based on a vow. So that idea of the vow and building things on churches on top of hills happens in Paris and in Shanghai at the same moment. And that is part of the mindset of these Jesuits. They know that, of course. So the Shanghai was spared, so no massacres in Shanghai, so they had to build a church. And so they did. And 1871, 1873, they erect a church, which is a neoclassic building, wooden structure, fully timber structure, with no tower, that is well embedded on top of the hill. And then staircases at the southern slope, connecting the top with the bottom. But this church one generation later turned to be too small. So projects were made for building a new church. And the superior of the Jesuits of Shanghai asked Brother Beck, who at the moment was the head of the workshop of carpentry in Tushanwan, Xiudaozhe Ta, to make a project for the new church. And this is his project. And the only thing we know from this project is this picture, this photo. Because all the archives are gone. They burned, as we will see later. But we recognize here the stairs with lions. These are the stairs here, with the lions on top. So he erected the new church, his project, on the same platform, but it was oriented differently. So this is the south, so he brought a new axis, an east-west axis, and he coupled the crossing with a dome, and on top of the dome, he proposed to put a statue of the Virgin Mary. So this is much more conquering the hill than this more low-profile building. This is much more visible, combining two towers and a dome on the top of the hill. But the superiors of the Jesuits, they refused this, because Brother Beck was a carpenter, not an architect, and his church was a timber church. So only the outer facades and the towers would be brick, but the inner columns and the clerestory and the dome would be a timber structure. And the Jesuits in Paris, they said, no, you must build something solid and definitive. So this is a step one. Now we must go to the definitive church that would become a basilica, so it's a higher status. And then they found an architect, Father de Moerloos, a Belgian architect who was the biggest church builder in the north of China. He built 6 cathedrals, a monastery, and tens of churches in the area of Beijing, Hebei, Tianjin, south of Inner Mongolia. And he was invited to Sheshan, and there he made a first design in the style that he was mastering, which was Gothic, and that style with 2 towers, and that style was refused by Paris, and Paris said you must do something Romanesque. And referring to Montmartre, the Sacré-Cœur. And this is the result of the second version of the Father de Moerloos, who was an architect, not a carpenter. It's in red brick, very Western. It's fully concrete structure with concrete vaults. It's very solid built. Long construction from 1923 to 1935-36. And it only has 1 tower, and on top of the tower you have a dome like Montmartre, and on top of the dome you have a statue just like the idea of Brother Beck. But you only have 1 tower, and we will see that it has a certain importance. This building is combining the east-west Western Christian axis, this is the west, the east is there, and the south-north Chinese feng shui axis. It's a very smart combination. And on each of the axes, you have other figuration of the Virgin Mary. One on the main altar, one on the north altar facing south, and the one on the cosmic axis connecting with the heaven. So it's a very strong project, but this is just the context of my story of today. Brother Beck is the central figure of this presentation. And Brother Beck, amazingly, I realized when I was writing this, spent exactly the half of his life in Europe and the other half of his life in China. So he was born in 1854, not 1853, as we can read often, and he passed away in 31. And during 38 years and a half, he lived in Europe, and 38 years and a half, he lived in China. And he arrived in China in 1892, 22 December, and he passed away in 1931. He was born in Bavaria in 1854, and there in a village in Bavaria, which is the south of Germany, area with a lot of woods. And there he studied, not carpentry, but he went to a school for becoming a forest ranger. So the people maintaining forests and planting trees and cutting trees and making selections of trees. And in 1877, he enters the Society of Jesus, so the Jesuit company, in France. And we don't know what happened in between. How from a forest ranger from Bavaria, he became a priest, not a priest, a brother in the Jesuit company in France. But 1870 is the year of that war between Prussia and not Bavaria, but Prussia and France. 1870 is also the year of the vow in Sheshan. You see time and space. And so he entered the Society of Jesus, and as a brother. That's an important point to understand the difference between a father and a brother. A father is a priest. He's trained, knows Latin, and is trained to say Missa and to give the sacraments. Brothers in the Jesuit order are really the little hands. They are coadjutors, that's the Latin word here. So they are helpers. And they are completely anonymous. In the archives, you just find their names in lists. But they have never a bio about these guys. You don't know what they did. They had just to shut up and to help the intellectuals, the scholars, the Jesuit teachers. And this is amazing that this one, he makes his name. And we will see a little bit how. But there, during that time, we know very, very little. We just know year by year where he was. He was for a time in Angers, that is in the western part of France, where he was working for managing the school buildings and the churches as a carpenter. All these schools, they needed carpenters to make furniture, to make the maintenance of the buildings. And we know that 10 years later, in 87, 88, he went to Canterbury because the Jesuits were expelled from France at that moment. The French moved in Belgium and in Jersey and in Canterbury, where they had a college, the St. Mary College. And during 1 year, he was the carpenter of St. Mary College in Canterbury. And there he met in England a British painter, Alexander Davis Cooper, and who was another generation, of course, but they became friends. So there he was also in contact with painters and painting techniques, because that's another question, where has he learned it? We don't know exactly. And then in 92, he's sent to China, to Shanghai, to Xiudaozhe, that is this area in Shanghai where the Jesuits, they had their center. And a part of Xiudaozhe was the Tushanwan, orphanage, with these arts and crafts schools, and he became very soon the director of the workshop of carpentry, joinery, and wood sculpture. So everything that has to deal with timber and wood. And he would have that task until his death in 1931. So that was his full-time job. Was not paid for make pagodas. Huh? His full-time job was to run a big workshop with hundreds of orphans of a boys' school that had to produce and generate money in order to educate, to be self-supporting, and to continue to educate these orphans. And he was also asked to design and build buildings. And amongst the buildings that he designed and built is a church in Pudong, a Tang Mu Xiao church. We will see it. In Sheshan, he designed and built a pavilion for the Virgin of Lourdes, Mary of Lourdes. 1903, 1904, he designed the famous Brussels Chinese pavilion that is still existing. That is one of his masterpieces. He also designed the church of Xuzhou, which is now a cathedral in the north of the Jiangsu province. And the San Francisco exhibition of the pagodas was held in 1915, as you know. So these pagodas were made at the same time he was designing these churches, making the Chinese pavilion of Brussels. So all these things are happening parallelly. So we really have to look accurately to chronology. And then a drama happened in 1919. In 1919, the Tushanwan orphanage and all the workshops, they burned. And all the archives of Brother Beck were lost. And the museum he had made by collecting, here he's posing, you know this photo because he's posing with the pagodas, but my point is the building here in the back. So this building was his little museum. He had collected elements of sculptures from Anhui and Jiangsu, so the Jiangnan area, which was the area where the French Jesuits were doing their missions, And you had a lot of temples that were ruined after the Taiping area, and he just saved elements of sculpture. And you know the quality of the sculpture of that area is very high. And he brought them here in this, what he called his museum. And these pieces would become the examples that the kids were copying. So he was creating by getting these 100% real Chinese elements that he selected with his Western point of view, because you've seen that he's designed also Gothic things. And then he taught, he educated these Chinese kids, but in a Western method with real Chinese elements that he has chosen. So you have there an interaction which is exceptional. With that museum, we will come later back on the fate of this museum. So briefly, Shanghai, this is a famous map of 1933 that is also exhibited here. Shanghai Catholic, this map is a big map, printed in Tushanwan in the print shop. This is a lithography with color. You have the concessions, the Chinese city here. That's the French concession. And Xiudaozhe is not in the French concession. It was just outside the last extension of the French concession. And was, so that's a detail, we will look at this later. That's Pudong. And then a canal is connecting the center of Shanghai and the French concession, going through Xiudaozhe and going down further to Sheshan. So they are connected, and Xiudaozhe is well, the starting point in Shanghai on the way to Sheshan. Zooming on Xiudaozhe, here, this is a map from the around 1890, with a canal here, Shanghai, Sheshan, or the Songjiang area. This was the center of the Jesuits, was the place where they built their big cathedral, which is said to be the largest church in East Asia. Here, it was not built as a cathedral, but it became later. They had their boys' school, a college for Western children and the children of the Chinese elite, learning Latin and the history of France, not of China. You had the residence of the Jesuits, the famous library of Xiudaozhe, which is partially still conserved in the building in question. The observatory, the first observatory of Sheshan, and other scientific buildings that will move later to the university. And then this side was the girl orphanage and the sisters, was separated with the gender separation of the canal. And then more south, not visible on the photo, more south, you had a monastery of contemplative sisters in this area, and here in this curve of the canal, you had Tushanwan with the orphans' boys. Orphans' boys were the most far away from the orphans' girls. There was only one bridge. And the orphan boys were also far away from the elite boys. So you see these segregations or these discriminations in space. And in between you had Christian villages, because it happens that when they became adult, an orphan from Tushanwan married an orphan from orphan girl from this place, and they became a Christian couple and lived in this area. So that was part of that Christian idea of Catholic project of the Jesuits, raising kids, saving kids, giving them skills, educating them in order to become Catholic Chinese for the next generation and having Catholic children. So that is really the one of their projects, how it worked. Ending this long introduction, Father Beck did not build his church in Sheshan, but he built other things in Sheshan. And here he built, amongst other, this Gothic spire, which is not a pagoda, but for Chinese at the time, this was understood as a pagoda because you had a spire on a polygonal size with a statue, in this case, of the Virgin Mary inside. So that was a very popular place in the pilgrimage, on the terrace half height. And on the stairs, you have many photos and group photos always taken in front of this place. And in the diary of the pilgrimage that I found in the archives, well, we can see each time Brother Beck is coming to Sheshan and with who and what are the dates. So for example, here on in September 1917, the 2nd September 1917, the father minister, so that's the head of all the material things of the Society of Jesus, with Brother Beck, come to see the terrain, so the grounds of the future church. So that is the moment he's commissioned to make his project in 17, project that is rejected in 18. Well, two parts of this talk. The first one is about the other Tushanwan architectural models, other than the pagodas. That's why we are beyond the pagodas. To which kind of architectural models belong the pagoda models and the other models made by the Tushanwan workshop? What do the other architectural models tell us about the pagoda models? And why did the Jesuits use architectural models for their missionary propaganda? Because that was not just to spend time to make art, it was really with the aim of evangelization. And the second part will be the Tushanwan scale model of the ruined pagoda of Sheshan. So we will focus on that one. What does the Sheshan pagoda tell us about the process of making the pagoda models? That's the question you raised. How accurate are the Tushanwan pagoda models? And why is the Sheshan pagoda not reconstructed and figured as ruin? So only, 8 or 10 pagodas are ruins and all the other are reconstruction. And the conclusion of this talk would be Brother Beck was a missionary, a carpenter builder, and an educator that we all know, but was he an archaeologist and was he a scholar? Question mark. Try to answer this question. So starting with this photo that is well known, I zoomed in this photo. I asked a high resolution of this photo in order to zoom in it, because I observed that there are a lot of models depicted. So this is a photo in the carpenter workshop. That is really carpentry. This is not joinery. This is certainly not sculpture. That is Brother Beck. And you see orphans. Some are small, others are teenagers. And there are different kinds of models. And I use colors here to make a difference between, first, in blue, these are technical models of elements of carpentry. Here you have a Western truss. Here you see with the king post, the tie beam, the truss, and here the post. So these are elements that these kids were using to understand how a truss and carpentry is working, because they learned Western carpentry, not Chinese carpentry. This is here the base of an octagon, of a spire, of a tower of a church. The other ones are models of full buildings, and they are big models. You see there is a kid standing here, there, near this facade of a cathedral. It's not Xiudaozhe, it's not Guangzhou, maybe it's a project that has not been done, but it is a cathedral with 2 towers, so a very prestigious building. This is a church with 1 tower. This is maybe one of the college buildings of Xiudaozhe. We know that there were models made for that. And these models here are different, so these are only facades. And these models are models with no roofs where you can see how the timber is inside. You all know these educational models that existed in schools with a human body and that you could open and that you have the organs that you take out and see how they were inside. And then you understand how these things fit together. Well, the same exists with architecture. So they were educational models. These were technical models. So in the family of models, you have architectural models as a whole. And architectural models are scaled-down representations of buildings and structures. Scale is important, and we will see that there are very different purposes. They can be physical models, but today there are also digital models. The word model is still used today. 3D models, but the same idea, the same purpose is to be a crucial element in the design process, from early stage to final stage. And they visualize how a building will look and will be used, will function, before the construction begins. The aim is to facilitate understanding, communication of ideas. In the design process, it's really ideas are growing and are discussed, and sometimes they are so complex that the model can help you to see inside and outside, and not only to be limited to two-dimensional plans and sections. You can see it, and you can see perspective and change the angle. Now 3D models are doing all this. You can really enter, etc. And they also facilitate the collaboration between different actors, the designers, but other actors, interior architects or landscape architects doing the surroundings, and of course the decision makers. The client also wants to see his model, and is not happy, then they change the model. They discuss on that, because clients usually they are not so used to read plans in 2 dimensions, and when you come with a 3-dimension model, well, of course they understand it better. So this is about architectural design. Models are used at various stages of the design process. In the beginning, you have these conceptual models that are small scale with the masses and how they are settled on a site. And then gradually, they have all these different kind of models ending with the presentation model. You have models that are only showing exterior, others that are showing interior, circulations, decoration. Some are urban sections of cities, other are landscapes. So you have models that can be used for a lot of purposes, but always designed by architects. They enhance understanding and improve the quality of design. Engineers are also using models for testing buildings. So you have these models that are tested in these tunnels where they are, what's the name of these tunnels where they flow air to see how a building can resist to wind, the wind tunnels, yeah? So these are also models, and so they can calculate and see the deformations. And they test all kinds of things. So that's the part of the models in the world of architects. And you understand that the pagodas are not belonging to this world. So some examples of these models, these are coming from Paris. So this is a model for the exterior of the famous church Notre-Dame du Raincy, a first concrete church. This is for a concrete structure, the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. That is the Panthéon in Paris, extremely complex building with these 3 domes, 1, 2, 3, the 3 shells, and how it works. You cannot figure that with drawings. You need a 3D to understand it, and they combine section, elevation, the underground floor, the inner circulation inside the walls. So you have so much information on this, and that is combining all the dimensions. These are engineering models. Here, a section of a roof of a building in a world exhibition in Paris with a Polonceau trusses, bridges. You see the sections of bridges and see how the beams are articulated. Cranes also are a lot of models. And for Tushanwan, we have 2 photos of design models, and these are the design models of the Brussels Chinese Pavilion, ordered by King Leopold II of Belgium, and built in 1903, 1904. It's designed by a French architect, Alexandre Marcel, but he asked Brother Beck, or he ordered in Tushanwan, the whole facade of the building. So the structure and what's happening behind the facade is not Brother Beck. Brother Beck made the facade. This is the first model, and this is the final model. So compare with the facade. Here, these bays are different. The rooftop is different. The decoration is a little bit different. So this area is also redesigned. So this is the result of discussions. But we don't know more than these 2 photos. We just can imagine that things happened, but we don't know how and why or when precisely, we don't know. So this is the building, and then later in 1907, this pavilion, this music pavilion, which is called a kiosk, was also commissioned to Tushanwan as a complement of this main building. A photo album of this building is preserved in the library of Shanghai Xiudaozhe library. And it's an album with original photos of different stages of the construction. And here they are making the big columns of the facade. So they are the four main columns that are here. The orphans are carving them. They are real big beams. This is the Consul of Belgium coming to inspect the works. And you see from the pigtail here that we are still in Lei Qing time. These are details of the columns. And we can compare details from the photos with the details of the carvings in the building. You see how rich this is, and many of these details are based on these carvings from the Anhui area that had been saved by Brother Beck and preserved in his museum. Most Chinese scholars I visit this pavilion with, and I think we did it also, they all say this is not Chinese, this is over Chinese. This is too decorated, you will never find the building like this in China. But again, this is a perception by Westerners. But when you know that this has been done in China, shipped over to Europe, done by Chinese orphans, but based on the taste of this Brother Beck, who was a half-half, because he was largely enculturated in Shanghai, but he was a Western missionary. And this is the background to understand this. So it is a chinoiserie. It is a modern chinoiserie from the 20th century, still in the long tradition going back to the 17th and the 18th century. But it is very different because you have Westerners in China involved in the making of this. And that's the pavilion, the Tingte, that is also over-decorated. The columns, the stories here are all referring to classic stories. So there is a lot of iconography, and in that album, this is explained. Some decorations on the facade of the pavilion are referring to the king, who is the patron of this building, but he had a colonial dream in Africa. And so you also have African stories carved in Shanghai. So you see that global aspect that is just in the decoration in front. And you also have the old Belgian missionaries, Father Verbist, the Jesuit from the 17th century. He's also depicted above the door, Leopold II. So this is this kind of perception from Europe, from that global and colonial perception of the world at the time. And in the album, you also have the different groups of orphans who were involved in the making, because these were different teams who were specialized. So you have the orphans sculptors. So the orphans joiners, it's not the same, and the orphans vernishers. They were doing the lacquer work. And that was extremely important for all the furniture, all the things. That was a lot of lacquer work, and that requires a lot of time, time consuming. And then you have photos of elements of the pavilion. That is a window of the upper floor. There's the main gates, and you always have the orphans posing and showing this. So they had archives, but except this book that was not in the fire, the rest disappears. A plan of Tushanwan with the different parts of the orphanage. The main entrance was here with the main courtyard, the chapel. These were the rooms of the orphans, the kitchens where they were living. And this whole area was the print shop, with the photography workshop, with the painting workshop, with the imagery workshop. They were printing images, Stations of the Cross spread to all the churches in China, but also in Indochina, in Korea, in Japan. And these were the books of the Tushanwan press. So that was one part. this was another part, and that is the carpentry. In the carpentry, you have the joinery. This is the vernishers. And then you had stocks, of course, of wood. They were sewing the wood to depots. And here there is a salle des antiquités, so a room with the antiques. And I think that was the museum of Brother Beck. They were called that antiques. And that was the part with the iron works, because they were casting bells. They were also doing goldsmiths. So there you had kilns. You had different tools. So these are the three main sections of the orphanage, and Brother Beck was the head of only this part. And the brothers, yes, I forgot to say, they were living on the upper floor of this wing. So they were living here. They were really part of the school and of the educational project. Let's shift to another kind of architectural models, still architectural, but no more linked with design. These are the models used to present, the presentation models. Because when your work is finished, well, you have convinced your clients, or you make a real estate project. Still today you have that, apartment blocks, and you try to find clients. You promote your work, and you also use it for fundraising. And that is how the model of Sheshan was used. I found this photo in this Catholic journal of Shanghai, the Revue Catholique. So that was a Chinese journal for the Catholics of Shanghai. And this is the issue of May 1918. And it's the same photo, except that here there is a scenery that has been painted. Because here you have no context, no landscape, it's abstract. And here they painted the hill and with bushes and trees painted on the photo. And it was also accompanied with a plan showing the footprint of the first church with the lion stairs that you have here, Turn to the south. And the new church, much larger, the observatory here, and the new church with the new axis east-west. That's the only thing, and the text here is just begging for money. And they wanted to build this in 4 years, very, very fast. It didn't happen. This is another church designed by Brother Beck, the church of Tangmutiao in Pudong area. This is considered as his masterwork. It could have become a cathedral of Pudong, but Pudong never became a diocese at the end. French Jesuits, they needed, they wanted to keep that. So that is the model. So that's really a presentation model. It's more rough. You see the windows are not detailed, but it gives you the volume. So people seeing this, turning around, touching it, could understand how it would look like. With a long nave, with a large transept, with an apse and an ambulatory, and with a single tower very high in the flat area. This is designed, as I said, by Brother Beck, and this is, believe me, a timber church. So the tower is brick, and the outer wall of the aisles, the transept, and the outer wall of the ambulatory are brick. But the columns are timber. The clerestory, which is above the columns, is also timber. And the vaults are timber, lath and plaster. And of course, the timber structure above the vaults is also timber. So the vaults are hanging under the trusses. And here, maybe you can see the clerestory, which is, you see it's a different color here. It's also timber. Well, that's my work, is also to visit these places and to do building archaeology and to document, to understand how it was built and to have the confirmation about how these buildings were realized. And the last category of models, here we are leaving the world of architects and design and construction, but we go to a world of craftsmanship and art history, which is very different. Because craftsmen are not really designing, or designing differently than architects, completely different, all the methods. And art historians are not designing at all. They are studying buildings that are existing, that have been designed by architects in the past. So some of the models are educational models that are used in schools or in museums, and the Tushanwan pagodas are part of educational models. Other are these models for craftsmanship, and we have seen these details of trusses in that inner photo of Tushanwan. Other are architectural history models that are more analytic and that allow comparison. If you have a series at the same scale as our pagodas here, well, they allow a comparison. Architects are not interested in comparisons when they do a design. That's not their purpose. That's a very different way of working. And then, of course, you also have propaganda. Propaganda in public exhibitions, in thematic sections, but also of world visions of a society. So these models can contribute to develop big projects that are part of political vision on the city or big developments of urban development. And these models, at the time you had photos, but not all the digital tools we have today. They were really important to show big projects in exhibitions, in world exhibitions and other, as we will see. So this is briefly educational models in museums, but they are from the 19th century, showing here how a factory is working with the different stages of the production of this iron production factory. So that is a model of the 1880s. That is pedagogical, no design. Here is the construction of a building in Paris, also a 19th century model, explaining the scaffoldings, the cranes, how the materials is arriving. It's telling another story, and that was how kids were educated. This is before the age of movies. And this has color, it's much more exciting than photos, because you have that 3 dimension, you can turn around, see inside and outside. This is pedagogical. These are models for craftsmen. These examples of complex structures of roofs, using sometimes a plaster or wood, or then these kind of masterworks with complex things. You can't understand it with a 2-dimensional drawing. You need a model to understand it and to turn around it and to see how it works. Or then here also the articulations. These models are not carved, they are assembled. So this is really a miniature construction, and each beam, each piece of wood is a beam, and the connections, the articulations are mimicking in smaller, reproducing in smaller the big one, the real ones. And then these propaganda exhibitions, and I think this is the most interesting for our purpose today. It's part of the big pontifical missionary exhibition held in Rome in 1925 in the Vatican. So for the first time, there was an exhibition showing all the mission fields, the Catholic mission fields across the world. In Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in Canada, in all the mission fields, in Australia, in New Zealand, in India. So all the mission fields. And these different religious orders, they used models. And you had a big gallery of the models. And here, this is a section, I have not a photo of the section of China, but this is in India. And you have very big buildings, but these are just villages. This is called the Mariabad, the village of Mary. And this is how the village is organized and how it grows with different stages of evolution of a village. Or you have schools, you have cathedrals with towers, you have and this is a wonderful photo showing Punjabis making the Cathedral of Lahore in Punjab, today in Pakistan. And this was presented in this exhibition in so it was a common way of showing buildings rather than photographies and plans. Here you have big plans, but that is not talking to visitors on the same way. And we know from text, but I have not photos of that, that Brother Beck and the Tushanwan workshop also produced scale models of buildings in Shanghai and Xiudaozhe. They were sent to the Paris Universal World Exhibition of 1900 and also to the Vatican exhibition. So there was a big model of whole Xiudaozhe in 1900 presented in Paris. And of course, we have here the series that you know. But what is interesting here is the idea of the education. This is what is written in the catalogue from 1915. And the catalogue explains clearly that these are educational models. And they were also exhibited in the Palace of Education, definitely not in a section on architecture. It's educational is more. It is educational in more senses than one. It shows the manual training of the Xiudaozhe orphans and the research work of Brother Beck. So that is the aim, to see what these kids are able to do, how they are educated, what are their skills, and what is the perspective, the educational perspective of this special school. And then it tells more plainly and more eloquently than many books can tell. So that the book is 2 dimensions, this is 3 dimensions, that is the point here. What wonderful builders the Chinese of ancient times really were. So that is the superlative discourse around the presentation. That ends my first part, different kind of models, and how the Tushanwan is part of that. The second one is the Sheshan model. And the Sheshan model is here on the left, and this is a photo. And if you compare, they are seen from the same point of view. The openings are at the same places. The proportions are the same. And this really looks like a photo that was made for making the model. Because making a photo like this, you need a scaffolding, you need to cut tree, you need to be placed at half height in order to have not too much deformation of the upper parts. And then in Tushanwan, they had a photographic workshop, so they have photographers with very good material, with these big glass plates. And this is one of these photos, and we will see details of it later. So first question we can ask ourselves is, how were the pagodas made? And on this photo, we see pagodas under construction. And we see the different stages and the different part of a kind of operational chain involving different skills of the orphans. But the main question is how these pagodas were chosen. And in the booklet of the exhibition, there is an explanation. But again, you have to read this critically. The explanation tells that Brother Beck was admirably equipped for the tasks. Besides the encouragement received from the Chinese government authorities, I'm really wondering which one, who deeply appreciated the ideas of restoration. In 1910, restorations. And the freedom he had in consulting historical documents and national archives. This brother in his workshop going to national archives, I'm questioning this too. The Jesuit brother, he has no name, had the exceptional advantage of being in direct communication with his fellow missionaries in different provinces of the Republic. And that is true. As a missionary, he was part of a network of Jesuit missionaries who were in several provinces. The Jesuit missionaries were in the Jiangnan area here, and then also in the south of Hebei and Tianjin, this area. But he was also in contact with other French missionaries. The Lazarists, who were in Beijing and also in Hangzhou. And then the French Missionary Society, Mission Étrangère de Paris, French Foreign Mission. They were here in Singapore, but they were also in the south of China, Guangdong, Sichuan, Guizhou, etc. And they were in Dongbei, and in Korea, and in Japan. And maybe that explains why you have also Korean pagodas in the collection here, because they got easily the information. So I imagine sending letters and asking for photos and for documentation, but we don't know what kind of documentation they received, except photos were their sketches, but they were not measuring these pagodas. They were maybe photos with well, as we will see. The second point is supplied with the information, with the material and with the builders, Brother Beck began his work. And he has succeeding in rebuilding. So he reconstructed them. Based on photos, he was able to do a geometry of a pagoda. That's not very difficult because they are square or they are 8 size. So when you have an octagon, well, you can enlarge it or reduce it. It remains an octagon. And then having the elevation based on photos. And that is how he was able to reconstruct, but we don't have his drawings and his plans, without having to visit these places, because he never been to all these places. He's certainly been in the Shanghai area, in this area where he was active, maybe here, Jiangsu and Anhui, and maybe Hangzhou, but certainly never in Liaoning or in Sichuan. He never been there. So it was really a second-hand information and understanding of these pagodas that could explain certain, not mistakes, but approximations in the way how they made them. But this is, these are photos that I found in the archives in Paris. This is a photo of the pagoda of Wuhu. If you go today, it's reconstructed, it has roofs, etc., but it was a ruin at the time. And this is a photo taken from a boat in the middle of the Yangtze. So you imagine these photographers coming with the camera, with their glass plates, far enough from the pagoda to have it on a photo that is without deformation. And when you compare this with the photo in the catalogue, well, you understand that maybe these kind of documents were used to make the appearance and the proportions of these pagodas without having to send people on top and to measure them with rulers, which they of course never did. This is an odd example. This is in Songjiang. Wuhu is in Anhui, so that's Jiangsu River. This is Songjiang, this is not far away from Sheshan. And here we have a photo. That's the pagoda, and it's exhibited here too. And we have a father giving the scale. Here we have 2 orphans who are carrying the material. They were carrying the boxes for the photographic material and all these glass plates. And the photo is taken without deformation and trying to get the leaning pagoda in this case. And it's also leaning here, but a small one. And that is 1919, the photo of Tushanwan after the fire. So only the brick walls are surviving. All the rest is gone. So all the interior that we see here on these photos that are predating the fire is gone, is lost. And all the archives of Brother Beck, because he had his plans somewhere, he had his notebooks, he had his photos, he had his letters with the missionaries from other places. All this is gone. 1919, that is 4 years after the exhibition in San Francisco. And this is the main courtyard with the chapel and this monument. What happened with the museum? Well, in most studies about Tushanwan, is mentioned that the museum burned. But in the archives in Rome, I found a note that the museum has not burned, but that the Jesuits will sell all the content of the museum to get money to rebuild the school. So you can imagine Father Beck, his school, his archives, ashes, his museum saved, but sold. He's a small and modest brother. He has to shut up. And all his pagodas sold also. But he's an educationer, so his pupils, his kids were all safe. And they had to rebuild the school to continue the work. And he was the head of that workshop, so he had the responsibility of rebuilding after the destruction of this system. So we can imagine how dramatic it was for this man at that moment to see a part of his legacy lost in one fire. But that was not his main purpose. He was a missionary, an educator, and a part of a system where they had to produce money to educate more kids. But the result is that the archives of the pagoda are lost, and we miss all the documents. We don't know, we have no plan or drawing designed by Brother Beck with the geometry. Was he using sections? We don't know. And for a pagoda, a section is so important to see what's happening inside and how it's built. But they're not interested in that. Oh, I cannot believe he was not interested, because he was a carpenter. He would be interested in the structure of a timber pagoda, not a brick pagoda, maybe not. But the timber, certainly. And we also don't know what was his method. How did he, from his drawings, educate the kids to make the models? Because these kids were not architects. They were not able to see in terms of construction, but well in terms of decoration or making elements, but not the whole. We don't have the chronology of the series. When have they been done? What were the oldest? What are the last one? Where they're starting randomly in the Jiangnan area, and then suddenly maybe the superior said, oh, there is something interesting we could develop here. And then they started to connect other missionary orders to get information. We don't know. His site visits and notes, which one did he visit, which one not? We can guess it. His reconstructions, based on what, the reconstructions? On traces that he did. He was not a building archaeologist. He was a carpenter, again. And then how did the orphan works? The orphans were sculptors, but they were not architects. And last point, now we know how they worked. We will focus on one case, and that is the Sheshan Pagoda. The Sheshan Pagoda, and here we reconnect with my long introduction, is here. And as I told you, the Jesuits, they demolished all the traces of the ancient temples on the hill, except the pagoda. They kept the pagoda. But they did not restore the pagoda. They kept it as a ruin. And that is certainly with a purpose. This is another photo. They are constructing the observatory that is dated from 1900. You have the village here, the residence higher. You see that dominance, that Western architecture, vernacular architecture. They are very, very strong photos. No trees on the hill, and the pagoda at the eastern side of the hill. Here you see the rock even. That is the list of all the temples that were on the hill. This is a photo of a page in my book. And they were all destroyed. And only one was rebuilt by the local villagers at the foot of the hill. You have here the platforms of a larger temple, burned, and here a very small Guanyin temple rebuilt on the foot of the hill for the villagers who should not have to climb the hill each time that they wanted to burn incense to Guanyin, and there was one monk in this temple. And here you have the scale of the hill and the constructions of the big basilica in the 1930s. The only remains of the former temples are these lions, grasped from different places of the hill, placed on top of the terrace, but they are not placed as usual. Usually you have one lion at both sides of the entrance. Here they put 8 lions all facing the landscape and protecting the entrance of the church that is here on the right. So this is the upper part of the stairs. And that was a way to reuse these lions to protect the church. But the church was opening on the altar with the statue of Mary. So when the gates were open, you had the statue of Mary watching this landscape and dominating the landscape. And these lions were there like little dogs around the entrance, nothing more than that. So they were really reused. And when they built the new basilica, they suppressed this. They had no more need of this. Now they are gathered on other places. That's a horse, but from a tomb alley. And that's a detail of the photo. That photo, as I told you, is extremely accurate. This is a high definition scan of the original. You can even see the details of the construction. These brick bracket sets here that are more or less correctly reproduced here. The windows, and here even you have a Jesuit in a window, like here on the photo, like this one. And then here they are sitting on the stones that were the stones under the poles of the roof, the first roof around the core of the brick pagoda. And this guy is drawing. Maybe he's mirroring. I don't know. But this shows how accurate some photos could be. This photo is taken higher than the bottom of the tower, so it's more or less half height of the tower, or 2/3, 1/3, 2/3, in order to have the less deformation possible. And we know that the seminarians, because these are future Jesuits, Chinese and French, they were visiting Sheshan often, but they were always visiting the ruined pagoda. That was part of their education. They were going to a pilgrimage place to the Virgin Mary, but they also had to see the ruins of that former sacred hill, the past and the present. And that is part of the propaganda. You bring a new religion, you keep remains of the old one to see these are ruins. We don't restore it. Today it's restored. If you go there, it's completely rebuilt. But here the intention of the Jesuits definitely was not to restore the pagoda. And so when the big church was erected, this one, with the tower and the statue of the Virgin Mary on top, replacing this one, just in this evolution of Shanghai that from the 1910s and 1920s is completely booming and become the big city. So the church of Xiudaozhe is rebuilt and become that big cathedral, 1905, 1910. The church of Sheshan is rebuilt and becomes a big basilica, 1923, 1936. These are photos of the construction, the blessing of the first stone with the bishops, Jesuits, laymen. Here still the terrace with the lion. And you are 100 meters high and this very big landscape. Here also under construction, the tower is under construction. And this is the church finished. When you have this landscape of the Songjiang Plain, and you see the tower of this church, the single tower of this church, with the statue of Mary on top, which is like a finial or a baoding on top, it looks like a pagoda. You could see it as a kind of pagoda. It's not a church with two towers or a dome. That would definitely be a Western thing. Here, with this strange tower with this stretched dome that's referring to Paris, and then that long statue on top, and this is a detail of the statue, it's no more existing, the present one is different, showing the Virgin Mary looking down and connecting with the pilgrims, and she's holding up above her head a baby Jesus, so it's a very unique iconography, and a baby Jesus with his arms stretched, announcing that he would die on the cross. So this is a very strongly theological idea, but at the same time, he is not looking down, he is looking to China, to the horizon. So that is really, Mary is the intercessor between the human beings who are coming in pilgrimage and reach the highest point human beings, living human beings can reach, and she is connecting from there to her child that is given to the whole country. So that is the story and the message of this statue, which is of course very strong, very ideological, or theological, depending how you see it. And on top of that single tower, which is that cosmic axis. And that is part also of how the Jesuits, in their evangelization, used the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus to replace Guanyin, child giver. So there were two Guanyin temples on the hill that were visited by Chinese mothers wanting to have a baby boy. And here that transfer of devotion was intentionally done by the Jesuits and successfully done. As you see, these are these propaganda images. You have the hill here, you have a Chinese couple, Christian, with a boy, and they come here as a thanksgiving, as a thanking Mary to have given them a boy. And so that is the statue of the first church built on the hill, and that is one of these images printed in Tushanwan and spread to the people. And that is a detail, the statue taken from the scaffoldings on top of the tower. It's amazing, they were coming with cameras there. And there you see really how she's looking down and how Christ is looking to the horizon. That idea of Mary, Guanyin, of the new religion and the old religion is wonderfully synthesized with this page in a big album. When I found this, I was so happy to find a kind of confirmation of a hypothesis, because there are no texts explaining that explicitly. You have here in the same frame the photo of with the pagoda that we know, and near it the pavilion, the Tingze, designed by Brother Beck with the Virgin Mary inside, which is a Gothic style, but that was perceived as a pagoda-looking place with a statue of a saint inside, a holy place. And here they are placed together in an Art Nouveau frame. And that idea of Art Nouveau is also something new. So that is a style that has no connection with the East, no connection with the West. That's a style that has a connection with nature and freedom. So that is why it's interesting to see that they were using this. This is painted by orphans. The orphans were doing these paintings and the decoration of these luxury picture albums that were sent to Paris to the head of the Company of Jesus. So let's conclude. Time to conclude. So Brother Beck, now we know him a little bit better. Say a little bit, because there are still a lot of questions. So we know he's a missionary, but a brother. He was not a priest, not giving masses, could not give sacraments, he was not giving communion, not baptism, no weddings, could not do that. So a humble missionary, but a very skilled carpenter who was able to design big buildings, but with a timber frame. And he was an educator. And he was also a manager. He was able to run this workshop that was producing also elements of buildings. They were producing doors and window frames for churches built in Anhui, in Jiangsu, and sometimes 200-300 kilometers from there. And so they were standardizing these elements and producing them. That was the work of that workshop, and doing all the timber structures or elements in Shanghai for the mission, of course. But was he an archaeologist? Was he a scholar? I think he was not. And that's interesting to place him and to understand the value of his series of pagodas in the perspective of other pagodas and models of pagodas. That could be like this 18th century model, which is made from clay. This is a porcelain pagoda, showing the Nanjing one, but more or less. This is in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So it's high. This is 3 meters high. It's a big piece. But it's in porcelain. It's a kind of romantic, it's a chinoiserie, in fact. Or this one, this is the famous pagoda of the Fogongse in the north of Shanxi. This is in the Architecture Museum in Beijing, the Temple of Agriculture, now World Heritage. And this is a really architectural pagoda where all the elements are assembled. So this is constructed. This is not carved as the pagodas of Tushanwan. This is assembled. This is a real architecture model. So something very different. And now you start to reassemble all the pieces of my story that I hope is not too messy, but that you can interconnect. And of course, I could not end this without mentioning Yang Susheng and Lin Huiyin and their work, but that's in the 1930s, late 20s and early 30s. So that's an older generation. They are trained not as Chinese craftsmen, they are trained like Western architects in the United States, but from the French Beaux-Arts school, in that perspective. And when they come back, they start to really do building archaeology, Jiansu Kaogu. So that is another approach, and they make sections of the buildings. And that's the big difference. Beck, we have no section, we have no photo from interiors because it's very difficult to make photos of interiors. We don't know how a pagoda is functioning, and these pagodas are also decontextualized. As you see them in the museum, it's how they were presented in San Francisco. They are on a circle, but they are not in a landscape. And a pagoda is always an element of a landscape. So they are decontextualized, and they are objects in a series and on scale. But definitively different from this, which is made by architects who are interested in construction and design, and then also in the superposition of the different Buddhas and different forms of Buddhism in the same building that makes this one exceptional. And this one is not in the series of Tushanwan, while it is considered the most exceptional timber pagoda of China, the place that Brother Beck really should have visited and would have loved, I'm sure. There are no models with combining elevation and sections, models that you can open and see inside and outside. We see in red the plain walls, or the assembled elements. This is all carved or sculpted. And here you have a photo of an orphan working. He's not an architect, he's trained as a sculptor. And look at his tools, how he's carving, and have a saw, and he's working on small pieces of wood. And he's making details, decoration, ornament. And when you look closely to the details, you see they are not built, they are assembled, which is a little bit different. And here are the two other groups, the joiners and the sculptors. This is from an album from 1947, so that is the very end of the orphanage. And I end my story with this picture, which is the only picture I found of an encounter between a Jesuit, a Spanish Jesuit from Anhui, and a Buddhist monk. And we are in the 30s, because I think before the 30s, these encounters were just impossible communication. In the Jesuit propaganda, they are extremely negative about Buddhism. They consider it as a kind of degenerated and immoral religion. And of course, that is to polarize and to show that their religion is the only true one, etc., etc. So that is absolutely in a colonial perspective of conquering a territory. And as we know, religion and missionaries were part of what we call today informal imperialism. Formal is with the gunboats and the militaries, but informal are the engineers, are the missionaries, and who are going everywhere in the country and also bringing new things. So this photo is here. I'm just wondering what they were talking to each other. They are smiling and respectful, but there is a distance in between, and they are there in a place that is also in a big landscape. But it is a silent document, and we can just imagine things about this. And to end, these two photos show clearly the old and the new. How the ruin of this temple, with the small Guanyin temple, and here the construction of the hill. This is the future. And here the church is completed with its tower, pagoda-looking tower with the statue of Mary on top. And look, this photo is taken from an angle where the old ruined pagoda is exactly on the same line that is going to the heaven. That's the hill, that's the axis mundi, and that is the perception. And these photos, well, you have to read them because they are not incidental. And they are very strong, in fact. So what's the legacy of Brother Beck? Well, his legacy, in fact, could have been much more. Imagine if he would have built this church. So his legacy would be the largest pilgrimage church in China still today. but it is only known from one photo. It remained a project. He built this, but this has been destroyed. So if you go to Sheshan, you will see something that looks like this, but made after photos, but it's no more the same. And then you have the series of pagodas and the work, but I think his major legacy was perhaps educating children and give them skills that help them to become adults in Shanghai in a difficult society, coming from being abandoned children, and to grow up in a Christian perception, because that was fundamentally the role and his mission of his contribution to the mission. And when you know all this, you understand the complexity, because that is the final word, that is very complex. Mission is something that has aspects that are no more acceptable today, and other that are fascinating in their generosity and their naivety too, and in their project. And how a little brother from Bavaria, and having been to France and in England, spent the half of his life here to doing this kind of work. And his spirit is behind all the models that you have now in Singapore. And that is what I wanted to tell you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Koemans. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I think this is, I think all of you who like the exhibition, I think you must have learned a lot from this presentation. Professor Koemans not only tell us how complicated these models can be, at the same time how complicated Jesuits could be. You know, for example, like we have never actually thought about this issue, about the role of brother back within the society. I think at some point we were thinking, you know, because he was German, that and the Jesuits in China at that time was predominantly or dominated by the French. So we somehow think that he was somehow a bit isolated from the mainstream of the people there. But now you introduced another level of complexity, and also look at how I think. In fact, like somehow we would say like colonialism played a role also in this Tushanwan project. As you ended your presentation, it is like more complex. I mean, just like complicated that it is like. Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot that we can talk about. And thank you very much, Professor Koemans, for this wonderful talk. And now I think we won't go into Q&A immediately. I would say let's have a 5 minutes break. And we come back at 11:35. More than 5 minutes. A little break, and then we will have a response section by Professor Ho Pui Bing, whom you know very well from NUS, and then we'll also have a Q&A session. And then at the end, we will also serve lunch as well. And so I will see you again in 11:35 in a few minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, thank you. So now we are going to moving to our next section of this public seminar. Here, besides Professor Koemans, we also have Professor Ho Pui Bing from the National University of Singapore, and myself, and we will both be trying to respond to some of the issues that Professor Koemans brought up, and then we will also open up to questions and answers afterwards. So, Professor Ho, I will. Yeah, what do you think about the presentation, and what issues have intrigued you?
Yeah. No, I think it's a fantastic lecture. Thanks, Thomas, for this. And it's always very intriguing to ask the same question as you ask. Why would he put all these pagodas together? Right? For an exhibition in San Francisco, you might not even need 82 pagodas. Right? And you probably have 10, 15 representative pagodas. But in the exposition, in the exhibition, the purpose probably was to showcase every country's achievements, the best part of the country, the representativeness of the country, and so to select the pagodas for presentation, it's really quite astonishing, right? And so this is a question that keep coming up. So I did talk a little bit about the Western perception of pagodas in terms of the very distinctive architectural types that you come from that comes from Chinese culture. So that's one part. So I wonder whether that would be one reason that Brother Beck would produce so many pagodas and send it to San Francisco, right? I mean, you can see some are so huge, so at a lot of cost to send all these pagodas. Yeah.
I think there are several questions in your question. The first one is why San Francisco?
Yeah.
And this is during the First World War. That is a moment the missions of China are disconnected with Europe. And are also divided, because in China you had German missionaries and you had Italian missionaries and French, and so they were fighting against each other in Europe, but they were working to the same evangelization project in China. So that was sad. And certainly Brother Beck, who was a German, but he was a Bavarian, he never had been a German as such, but his identity, of course, was but he was a Jesuit before. So that is, so in 1915, they could not exhibit anything in Europe. There were no more world exhibitions. So that was the only possibility that they had. And they needed money, that is obvious. They had no more money coming from Europe. There were no more young Jesuits coming. They were sent to the front in Flanders Fields. They were no more coming to China. And they desperately needed money. And they could, in 1915, get money from the States, because, as you know, the States only started the war in 1917. I think that is one, again, element of the context which is global. Again, you are on 3 continents, but it is money-making. This orphanage needed money. But that is coupled with the other aspect, is the exhibition in the educational section. And that is to show Jesuit education. Jesuit education, are the best Catholic schools, are the Jesuit colleges, etc. This is an orphanage. So it is not the same, but they are giving other kind of skills to Chinese kids. And they're having the skill to Chinese kids that are learning and valorizing Chinese heritage. That is also insightful. And part of the propaganda, of course, because it's a way of not polarizing, but anticipating, in fact, the movement that will start in 1919, which is the movement of indigenization launched by the Vatican in 1919. So that is a moment where things are starting to shift in no more the Western model against or always compared, but things that are gradually merging in order to generate something common and more, well, respectful from each other. It's a turning point also.
No, it's fantastic because when you paint it in a more global kind of picture, as well as from the perspective of the church needing funding. We were just talking about to someone, it needs funding and needs the money, and at the same time looking at the work of the brotherhoods, the work of the church in China in educating. In craftsmanship. I mean, sometimes the exposition or the exhibitions is about craftsmanship, it's about craft skills and so on, and that's imparting from the church to the Chinese. I mean, those are all fascinating. Yeah.
I would also like to add something else, is that the Catholic missions, they were competing with the Protestant missions.
Sure.
And the main field of their competition was education. So they were targeting the elites. The Jesuits were very good in that, but the Protestants in the universities too. There were 12 Protestant universities in China. Only two Jesuit universities. The Catholics were only Jesuits, and then there was a third one in the late 20s in Beijing, but that is one generation later. So they were really competing. And here, showing this in the United States, that was dominantly Protestant missions, that is certainly part of the strategy and the propaganda too.
Well, most of the Protestant universities in China at that time were from the States. It's all missions and donors from the States. No, but the other question that I always will be asking, I mean, in your exhibition, you put some of the unfinished kind of, or the destroyed pagoda in one section, and some of the pagodas are not reconstructed by Beck, right? They were like in ruins, right? So why would a ruined pagoda be shown in the exhibition, or why would they actually even make a model of some of the ruin, like the one in Hangzhou that I talk about, right? So that's something else I was wondering, right? Rather than sort of really fantastic wooden carved pagoda that's so beautiful, and then some pagodas that's just in ruins. Yeah.
There are several answers. One is the old religion is past. Pagodas are associated with Buddhism. That is one. The second one is the taste of Westerners for ruins, because that is something that is not part of Chinese culture, and that is part of Western culture. With a lot of misunderstandings in international documents, and in the tangible and the intangible. So this is something that now is a hot topic, but it's certainly at the time. That's the problem of the ruins of Yuan Minyuan. The only tangible ruins are the western part, because it was built of stone. And here there are brick pagodas. The timber pagodas, they are ashes, but the brick pagodas, they become ruins. And the third thing is, I think that these pagodas that are depicted as ruins are pagodas maybe that Brother Beck could visit, that are in the area. And there they could measure them better or document them better.
Yeah,
but they could have used them to understand how they were built or see how it was inside. But
they never show the inside.
When you are talking about the ruins, I think that's another interesting issue, because I mean, for example, like you talk about the Sheshan one, which is like I think a wonderful example. But at the same time, there are several pagodas that were kind of like in a poor state. But in the models, they basically restore them, which I find, I mean, seems to be, I don't know how to make out of it. Because like when you're talking about Sheshan, I think the reason to keep it as a ruin is a kind of like as a comparison. I think there's a very plausible argument, very reasonable argument. And others I can understand as well, you know, for example, like the one in Hangzhou. The Leifeng Ta. I mean, that's a landmark, you know, so it's like something nice to show to the world, you know, I mean, this is how the Chinese kept the ruins, you know, that kind of thing. But there, for example, like the one in Zhengding, you know, the ones with like 4 pavilions around, you know, that's like a very important. It was in a poor state, but it was like really restored, you know, in a, I mean, the first time when I saw that, as a model, when it came to Singapore, I was like, wow. But I mean, it was like only after I find old photos that I mean, in fact, they did a lot of restoration. And thanks for bringing that museum of Beck into the argument, into the picture. Because now you mention it, I think a lot of the restoration, especially on the upper part, must have based on some real life sculpture. But I mean, I couldn't find where they are. But I mean, they seems to be pretty accurate and pretty nice, well done. I think, I mean, without something actual in front of them, I mean, I think the artisans or the orphans, they could never have been able to do such a thing.
But I mean, I thought in the museum, they would have kept mainly wooden objects rather than, first of all, Beck is a carpenter, And wooden objects like, I mean, I collect most of this as well, so different parts of the architectural elements. And so you have a chair T, you have a bracket.
The butts.
Yeah, that's right. You have all kinds of that, and those are wonderful sort of collectibles, and for the kids to understand how to carve a window, how to carve different parts of the wooden architecture. But the Guanghui Si one, I think that one was more or less brick pagodas, maybe with brick sculptures. So perhaps it's just a translation of the wooden sculptures or wooden decorative elements into the bricks elements. Maybe, yeah.
But you notice they never produced the image of Buddha.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just saying.
They never did. In Tushanwan, they never would do that.
Because as idols.
Oh yeah, that is.
Because of it. But I think in some of those, some of the pagodas, some of the reliefs, they have like Buddha-like figures.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I don't think they follow honestly the iconography of Buddhas, but I mean they are like definitely alluding to some kind of like Buddhist-like figures.
Yeah. The decoration of the pagoda.
The decorations.
But I mean,
as a
standing statues
I think
for the
that's
market, they never.
They would never do that. They would never do that. They would never do that. And also, I would like to. I have a comment about your last question about how can we understand Brother Beck? You know, is he an archaeologist or a scholar? I think, you know, after our research and also after your presentation, I think definitely I would say he was not a scholar or archaeologist as we understand it. But in the process of doing these 84 pagodas, it seems like he still kept the archaeological value and the scholarly value in a pretty sometimes distorted way to us. And it's only through, I mean, not just looking at the pagodas. We cannot just take the pagoda, the models as accurate replica, but I was only through comparing with other materials, you know, photographs or descriptions, then we get to know sometimes these information that were originally in these structures were somehow distorted and reconstructed in a way that eventually, you know, preserved in these models. And that's like something just, for example, like I shared with you yesterday, the Xiudaozhe Ta in Suzhou, they've got like a little group of sculpture at the entrance. I mean, that's something that you can't see anymore. And even in some of the photos, you can just like see vaguely there's something about the entrance of the pagoda. It's like only through looking at some of the reports, you know, written at that time that we know that once upon a time there were sculptures at the front and at the back. But in our model, what is at the front and at the back were combined into a group at the entrance. Also, I think it's, I mean, with this like crazy ways, you know, all this information was somehow preserved and distorted, reconstructed, and kept in our set of pagodas. Yeah.
But we definitely don't know enough about his method.
We don't know.
And
that's something that's,
as long as you don't know about his method, you cannot consider him as a scholar or as an architect, because he was designing, and maybe based on the photo he redesigned these pagodas with just geometry.
Yeah, I perfectly agree with that.
You know, the fact that he's not interested in landscape, or that is, we have no information about that, but you can't tell it from the collection that. And these pagodas are so important in landscapes as markers. Totally, so that is missing.
That's what I talked about. Yeah. No, but in a way, I mean, remember we're also talking about Boschmann, who's also a German, who also used the images of the pagodas. Right. So I'm just wondering whether he must have met Beck during his visits to Shanghai. And whether there might be some exchanges So that would become a question of whether, I mean, Boltzmann clearly is a scholar, an architect, and he drew, he sketched, and he measured, he took pictures, whereas Beck would be like producing the pagodas from impression. And so how the two will relate to each other. And the very fact that Boltzmann used Beck's images and models must have said something about his agreement, or at least recognition of Beck's achievement, right? In that sense, yeah.
But he got the images from the Field Museum in Chicago.
Yeah, that's right. Not from
not from Shanghai.
Not from Shanghai. That's
so
right.
That
yeah.
is, but indeed, it would have been possible. A meeting between both in Shanghai was perfectly possible.
Oh,
imagine that you can make a fiction drinking a beer together.
That's right.
What are they? What are they telling to each other?
Oktoberfest.
You can make a fiction about that. Huh?
No, but Boltzmann started in 1901 in Beijing, 1901 to 05, right? And so he must have stayed a long time in Shanghai. Must have heard of this brother Beck, and wanting to meet him. I don't know.
And also, Brother Beck was also in contact with Jesuit scholars.
Yeah.
So there they had also they were certainly coming and discussing this, and also his superiors, because never forget that all he did was with the authorization of his superiors that make time available, kids, to workforce available, and to make it a priority to reach these 80 pagodas, and not after 20 to say, okay, stop, it's enough, stop.
Yeah.
So there is something, maybe the scientific aspect is more coming from colleague Jesuits, from the scholars, than from the other brothers who were educators, and as I told you, very patient, because they had so many kids. Imagine the hundreds of kids and the noise in that school, but they had to go to church every day in silence and praying, so that was part of the education, and then patiently they were educating them to reach excellence in their work and to reach the pagodas. And I think these kids were super proud of. You can see on the photo.
But one other thing, I mean, a very small point, when you mentioned that many of these images from other provinces of pagodas, right, probably photographs and so on, would have been, say, sent to Shanghai, so for them to create these models. It's very similar to when Liang Siten was working on architecture history in China. He would have sent letters to photographic studios in different counties and said that, can you send me some photographs of old architecture in your counties? So before he planned for a trip for surveying in Shanxi, in Hebei, in other places, he would send these letters, and then he would receive some photographs, some responded, and then from the photographs he planned his itinerary, and then he would visit some of these old buildings. So very similar. I mean, in those days, today we can look at the satellite pictures and then pinpoint where we want to go. In those days, you have to do all that, and that takes months. Yeah.
And also, adding to this, at the time, there was no information available about these buildings. So you had the ruin of a pagoda like that, we have seen. Was it Ming? Was it Song? Nobody knew that. Right? Only fine scholars going in Difangzhe could have this information, but there was no inscription, no information on the sites, including in Beijing.
But even the Fangzi might not be telling the true story. So the Liang Siten and Yang Tingbao, when they were or Liu Dunzhen, when they were working in Beijing for this Institute of Research on Chinese architecture, they go through all the available Fangzi or Xianzi or Zhouzi or whatever, and they will pick up some monastery, but who knows whether the buildings were from that period remaining or something surprising. So there's an element of surprise, right? So the archaeology that you were talking about, the detective works that you're talking about, I think it's very much that that era, right? I mean, to us today, we are also surprised to some extent when we go to the field, but in those days would be so much more excitement when they found something, right?
Yes, and also mysterious, because as we know, a lot of information comes from the inscriptions on the steles or on the buildings or carved. We don't know the knowledge of Chinese by Brother Beck. That's a basic question.
Yeah.
So I think he was certainly speaking fluently Shanghaiese. Shanghaiese, because he was in contact with craftsmen and with workers.
Yeah, he must have.
But was he able to write and to read? because the people he was working with were not able to write and read.
No.
Were these orphans learning to write and read?
Yeah.
I don't think so. They were able to produce, but it's a basic question, so evident, but we have no answers.
No, that's true.
So you had intellectual Jesuits who were very fluent.
Yes, of course.
And maybe he could come with a text, or they could. So he had the possibility.
Yeah.
But he had not our translation tools. He had not our information. There were no books about Chinese architecture available.
No, not yet.
Not before the 20s, and then it's 15. So
not before the 20s. Yeah.
even the organization in dynasties was not existing.
Yep.
The periodization was not existing.
Yeah.
So
The history.
Yeah, and one little also comment about the legacy of Brother Beck. So in one of the videos, in the only video that we are showing in our exhibition, that's from the Boston College, currently held in the collection of the Rich Institute, we see some of the ovens in the 1947 when they produced like some huge frames. I remember like there was a shot when two of these orphans carrying huge frames out. One of them is like decorated all with pagodas along the frame, and other one that they brought out is all decorated with churches. So that's a pair. That's one of all important churches as decoration around, and other all with pagodas decorating around. So I think at some point, because of the fire, a lot of like information were lost, and I think it might be impossible for Beck to do that kind of like effort again.
No.
To do pagodas all over China like what we have again. But still, some of these like more iconic ones, he has taught the orphans, so they were still able to somehow make something similar to it, but not as accurate. And they were probably using that as some kind of like decorations for other things that they have. And also, as you showed us at the end of your presentation, in the 1920s, they're still promoting this. If you commission, then we can prepare this set of like pagodas over China for you. Is it the one that you showed at last at the?
That is from around 1900.
Is it no? The one on the right. That's like from a catalog of the.
From 47.
I think that was like much later. Yeah. So I think that was somehow still passed in a workshop. In a workshop. Yeah, this is not. Can you go back to the PowerPoint? The previous PowerPoint.
At the end.
Towards the end. Yeah. So I think it's somehow still. The technique, the know-how somehow was still in the workshop, but they didn't have the people to support them to do it anymore. And can you go back? Yeah, Jia would know which one that to start with. No, Jia. Yeah, this one. Yeah. This one, right?
Yeah, no, at the right side, that is from around 1900.
Oh, this one is from 1900.
Yeah, they're only talking about. They're preparing the series.
Okay.
So this is an older document showing
much
that
older.
They are used.
So they are used. Okay.
These pagodas are different, as you told.
Yeah, it's different from the ones that we have. It
so
seems
maybe
like
they first started with small pagodas, and then the superiors understood that there was a business to develop there,
and then they continue, and then they continue.
Could be.
Could be.
But I think, on that point, relating back to my lectures, there's a lot of pagodas being produced both for religious purposes, smaller ones, as well as for decorative purposes. And so it could also be like a business producing pagoda. No Buddha images inside, but then maybe for good luck, for warding off of evils, and so on in those days. And so you could make a business out of it, producing these pagodas. Yeah.
Or for the foreign market in Shanghai,
Yeah, for foreign
like
market
the
as well,
furniture,
yeah.
that was
Yeah,
also
yeah,
a kind of exotic element.
Yeah. People would like to have it. Yeah.
So maybe I'll now open up the floor to our audience. Any questions that you might want to ask to any of us?
Thomas.
I have a question. This may be over-interpretation, but in the collection of pagodas, there are two at least that are these pagodas of bountiful jewels. You have the one Qianlong gave to his mother, dedicated to his mother. There's the Tushanwan, the pagoda. There's another one of these pagodas that's associated with the Lotus Sutra, the Dobao Buddha, right? That the more you propagate the Lotus Sutra, the more these bountiful jewels multiply, bountiful jewel pagodas. And I can't help but see the coincidence that the final destination of these pagodas is San Francisco, where the centerpiece of the stage is a 435-foot bountiful jeweled tower. And my question is there any chance that that the workshop is perhaps interacting with its destination? Like could some of these have been made knowing that, you know, this is a jeweled tower, you know, that it would almost, you know, make this sutra, you know, true, in fact, that they do multiply. I would say even the flower pagoda that was the Xiudaozhe Ta pagoda that has the four corners and the large central spire that was reconstructed, you know, by the workshop. It was in ruins at the time. It really does also resemble the actual structure of this tower, this jeweled tower of the exposition. So yeah, I guess my question is, because we don't know you know why they chose the ones they chose. We don't know when each one was made. Is there a possibility that there was a little bit of interplay? It seems like a bit of a coincidence to me.
I don't know precisely, but I can imagine that architects designing the exhibition in 1915, which was explicit a Pacific exhibition, so United States looking to the west and no more to the east, that when you design a tower, you can give some elements from Asian culture. But this should be investigated about who was these architects, what were their references, and how these projects. So it would be really a study not on the series of pagodas here, but on the design of these towers and their signification.
No, I think you're reading too much. That would be my first answer. Obviously, the relationship between the exhibit organizer and the exhibitors, we need to look into that. Yeah. But then I feel that some of the pagodas, when you call them Dobao Ta or the Prabhupada Ratna pagodas, it's more relating to the Buddhist doctrines rather than to the reproductions of jewels in the literal sense. And so you should not read it too literally in that sense. And the flower pagoda or the Guanghui Si pagoda in Zhending that you refer to is a derivative of a form of pagoda that's known as Jinggang Baozhuo Ta because of the central, the four sided Buddhas and with the central Buddhas of four directions and Vajrayana in the center. And so that is slightly different kind of organization. Yeah.
Found inside of it.
Yeah, probably. But that the usual explanation for Shakyamuni and Prabhupada is that it's earlier beliefs of the transmission of Buddhism with the 7 Buddhas of the past coming to the present Buddhas of the of Shakyamuni. Yeah. Yeah, no. That's because you have
to overinterpret, but I thought that was a fun connection.
Yeah. I mean, that's very good because that shows your fertile mind.
Yeah, because erecting pagodas, you have also the pagodas of Murphy. He designed on the campus of Peking University. So this is building pagodas in concrete by Westerners happened also.
Oh yeah.
So, hi, way up here.
Yep.
Welcome, Professor Koolmans. Thank you for your lecture. I wanted to ask about one of your very last slides. In fact, that wonderful photograph of, you call it a cosmological axis almost, between where the cathedral or the basilica, new basilica, is sitting and where the pagoda is, and you seem to draw an imaginary line. I wanted to ask about that and what you know of what the Jesuits or the Chinese builders were thinking, because I was just in Yogyakarta, and UNESCO has given that line, that cosmological axis between Mount Merapi and the ocean, ending in the Sultan's Creton, as kind of a cosmological axis. I mean, that's a real award from UNESCO. And there was a real logic around that. So I wanted to ask you if there was that going on in that photograph there, or it's just the angle of the picture and you just happen to use the word cosmological axis.
I used the word cosmic axis, not cosmologic, but that's nearly the same. But this cosmic axis is a vertical axis, so it's not axis like the central axis of Beijing, which is also cosmic to a certain extent, but it's not the vertical one. The vertical one is the one connecting heaven and earth, and for the beliefs and certainly believers of a life, of an afterlife somewhere in a world that would be higher. And you could see all churches, like all towers of churches, you can interpret them like that. And certainly when they are connecting a crypt, take St. Peter's in Rome, where you have a tomb of a saint, and then the central point of a central planned building. If it's on the top of a hill, it's even stronger. And this is not only in the Christian religion. Look at all the temples that are on top of hills in China, some with, some without pagodas. But you obviously have the fact that the higher you are, the closer you are to heaven, and you are higher than the noise of the society, which is along the rivers and in the valleys. And that is how I understand that cosmic. And of course, you have different interpretations of different theories around it, according if you are in India or in China or in Christian world. But it is something which is common to many religions, and that is the interesting thing.
No, I think the axis mundi idea obviously is comparative religion. Right, so if you look up Mircea Eliate's work, the axis mundi, but I feel that this particular picture, Thomas is saying that the photographer took the pain to align the pagoda with the steeple, with the tower of the basilica, so that it must be something in there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Could be just artistic, or
could be just artistic.
Could be with a more theologic, but it's not incidental. I think.
That's
believe,
right.
Yeah, I mean that cannot be incidental. I mean, look at how perfectly they are aligned. And I mean, after seeing this picture, I would say, I mean, it's such a strong support for why Sheshan, the models and also the pagodas, why it has to be kept in this way? Because it's a part of this whole, Catholic, propaganda thing. The old religion versus the new religion. And I think that's like one thing that in fact we talked about, but you haven't included in your presentation. So that's like, I think also in the same magazine they have got this a close-up of the pagoda of Sheshan, and then they have like inscriptions below, and then it's like basically saying that's the new religion is coming is to preach the new and to replace the old. I think all these all add up together. I mean now, and thanks for bringing that up. Add a completely new dimension to our understanding of Sheshan and the architecture and also the model as well. Yeah.
And then you can also go a step further. These comparisons between the old and the new in China in the 20th century, it's not only the Christians who developed that. So, and the Catholics had real serious problems with the books of Sun Yat-sen. Exactly at the same time, or more or less at the same time. So that is, in a society that is changing so fast as the Chinese society in the Mingguo in the 20s and early 30s, things that are new become very fastly old. and that is the issue of modernity. That is these tensions between old and new, and progress and modernity. And that is how whole that traditional China until, the reforms of Kang and the end of the 19th century and then the end of the Qing Empire suddenly is awaking. And these religious, they play a role in that, through education, of course, but they are not controlling anything.
One thing that Thomas did not say, but he kept talking about Sheshan. Now remember in my talk, the second talk, I mentioned that was just a day after Pope Francis left Papua New Guinea to come to Singapore. And Pope Francis said at that time that he wished to visit Shanghai and he wished to visit Sheshan. Right? So to a Jesuit Pope, this represents China. At the beginning of the 20th century, today, closer to the beginning of the 21st century, he is still wanting to go back to Sheshan. So you can see the significance of this mountain, of this basilica, of their work, the Jesuits' work in Shanghai, close to, more than 100 years ago.
I think we still have time for one more question. I think that's the question there.
Professor Koopmans, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation and learned so much about the career of Brother Beck and the School of Jesus. I'm just wondering about the type of wood that was used for the pagodas. I imagine that Brother Beck, being trained as a forest ranger, might just go to the mountains and say, okay, this is good, that's good. I'm just wondering, are the pagodas from just one type of wood or from multiple types of wood? Because sometimes if you look at them, the colors of those that I think are not painted do look rather peculiar. For example, the Great Wild Goose Pagoda, the Tang Dynasty piece, looks very gray. Is that treated wood or natural? Thank you.
That's a question for Mr. Lam. But what I will certainly guarantee you is that Brother Beck, who knew the essences of wood in Bavaria, so Western, he certainly learned about bamboo and about Chinese structures, definitely. But about we talked a little bit about that.
We discussed a little bit about that yesterday. So our conservators, in fact, told us there are different kinds of wood being used for the models. So what they told us is, for example, like the one that are carved, that are not painted, they're of one type of wood.
Varnished.
Yeah, varnished. and then there's another one so that are painted there of another type of wood. That's what we were told by our conservators. But I mean, because of the tight time schedule, to put up the exhibition, the conservators didn't have enough time to actually do analysis on them. But as Professor Koemans discussed, in his presentation, Brother Beck, now we know that he's a forest ranger. He knows a lot about wood, I would presume. And then there are 7 years between, him being a forest ranger and then become a Jesuit. I mean, we don't know that what 7 years that he has been doing. But I mean, he was trained in, he must know a lot about wood. And I would think, I guess, that, in the whole process, he must have made some comments about what kind of wood for what kind of pagodas, or what kind of objects that he is going to make. Yes. So, I mean, that's like something that we are waiting for our conservators, to update us, after the exhibition is finished next year.
Because also, don't forget that wood in China is a problem, but in Shanghai is not a problem. You can have wood coming from all over the world. So maybe this is wood coming from the Philippines or from Canada. That's the wood market in Shanghai is a global market again.
Interesting.
And they had these connections. There were also things coming from France, materials. These military ships, they were also shipping materials, or shipping materials along the Yangtze up to Yichang and to Wuhan, and construction materials, bars for reinforcement. I found the text bringing to Yichang, so it's it's amazing to build there a concrete church.
Wonderful.
So that is how the materials were circulating. But the lumber was coming from Canada, because that is a big market at the time, and from the Philippines, and they are very different. Not from Indonesia.
Wonderful.
Time.
I think. Yeah, I mean, thanks for, all in a sudden you put our set of pagodas, in a global context in different ways. So, I mean, it's not just now a set of pagodas, made by Jesuits and presented in San Francisco, but now all in a sudden you're questioning also the materials, all these techniques, and also this mysterious brother, which further complicated the picture. So thank you very much, Professor Koemans. We are really happy to have you today, and thank you and also thank you, Professor Ho, for coming. And in fact, it's through Professor Ho who introduced Professor Koemans to us. Thank you, Professor Koemans, and thank you, Professor Ho. And and we hope you can join us again on the 23rd of January 2025 for our first talk of that year. Titled Xiudaozhe Family Batiks, Provenance and Collecting, by which will be moderated by our very own assistant curator Daryl. So closing, this is about this talk. It's more related to the current show that we are having at the Peranakan Museum. And also, we also appreciate if you could give us feedbacks by scanning the QR code on the screen. It will help us improve the way we organize our talk. And finally, I would like to thank Dalio Philanthropies again for the kind support of this talk. And I hope to see you again later in ACM. And thank you very much. We have lunch served outside. Thank you again for joining us this morning. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks a lot. Thank you. It's honest. Then you raised like so many questions that that's like really, I think that's another thing I would like to ask you. So